On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus Thompson steers his midnight blue Mercedes through Oak Hill's tree-lined streets, his mind preoccupied with the federal racketeering case he's prosecuting. The leather-bound case files on his passenger seat contain months of work, evidence that could finally bring down one of the city's most notorious criminal enterprises. The scent of his premium roasted coffee, contained in his Harvard Law Review travel mug, fills the car's interior as golden sunlight filters through the changing leaves above. At 42, Marcus has earned every accolade adorning his office walls. Graduating top of his class at Harvard Law, clerking for a Supreme Court justice, and now serving as one of the Department of Justice's most successful prosecutors, his record speaks for itself. Yet, as red and blue lights suddenly flash in his rearview mirror, none of that seems to matter. His hands instinctively grip the steering wheel tighter as he lets out a weary sigh. Third stop in 2 months. Following protocol perfectly, as he always does, Marcus signals and pulls over to the curb, positioning his car well away from the morning traffic. His movements are deliberate as he turns off the engine, places both hands on the steering wheel and waits. Through the mirror, he watches the officer approach, noting how the man's casual stride shifts to a more guarded posture upon reaching the driver's window. License and registration, the officer demands, his hand resting unnecessarily on his holster. Marcus notices the nameplate. Officer James Sullivan. "Good morning, Officer Sullivan," Marcus responds, his voice carrying the measured calm he uses in courtrooms. "My documents are in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." He narrates each movement, a routine he learned early in life, one no law degree could render unnecessary. The officer's flashlight beam sweeps across the car's interior, lingering on the leather briefcase embossed with the Department of Justice seal. Marcus catches the slight narrowing of Sullivan's eyes, the unspoken question about how a black man comes to possess such items. "This is quite a vehicle," Sullivan remarks, his tone carrying an edge of suspicion. "What brings you through Oak Hill this morning?" "I live here, officer," Marcus replies evenly, presenting his license and registration. 5 years now, on Maple Drive. He watches Sullivan scrutinize his license, looking between the photo and Marcus's face multiple times, as if expecting to find a discrepancy. "You were impeding traffic back there," Sullivan states, though Marcus knows the early morning street had been nearly empty. "Driving well below the speed limit, creating a hazard." Marcus's jaw tightens slightly, but his expression remains neutral. "I apologize if it appeared that way, officer. I was observing the school zone speed limit near Oak Hill Elementary. My son attends first grade there." The mention of his son would humanize him to some officers, but Sullivan's demeanor remains unchanged. Through the window, Marcus spots a white sedan speeding past, well above the limit. Sullivan doesn't even glance at it. "Step out of the vehicle, please." The request, more of a command, hangs in the air. Marcus thinks of his 9:30 a.m. meeting with the U.S. Attorney, the grand jury presentation at 11 o'clock. He thinks of his son's proud face when he tells him about putting bad guys in jail. He thinks of the countless times he's stood before judges, arguing for justice, while wearing the same kind of suit he wears now. "May I ask why that's necessary, Officer Sullivan?" "Sir, when an officer gives you a lawful order, compliance is not optional." Marcus's hand moves to his seatbelt, slow and steady. As he steps out into the autumn air, his polished Oxford shoes crunching on fallen leaves, he stands to his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of dignified presence in a tailored charcoal suit. The morning sun catches his Department of Justice lapel pin, a small but significant detail Sullivan pretends not to notice. What should have been a 5-minute traffic stop stretches to 20 as Sullivan runs routine checks on Marcus's vehicle. Finally, the officer returns with a citation for impeding traffic, a $300 fine, and a mandatory court appearance. As Marcus watches Sullivan drive away, he glances at the citation in his hand. Traffic court is scheduled for next Tuesday, Judge Richard Blackwood presiding. Little does he know, this minor traffic stop is about to spark a chain of events that will shake the entire judicial system. The municipal courthouse bustles with its usual Tuesday morning chaos, harried clerks shuffling papers, anxious defendants whispering to their lawyers, and the steady drum of the security checkpoint scanner. Marcus Thompson sits in the back row of courtroom 3, his Italian leather briefcase resting against his leg. He's purposely scheduled his morning to allow for this inconvenient detour, though the irony isn't lost on him. He'll be prosecuting a multi-million-dollar fraud case this afternoon in the federal courthouse 6 blocks away. Judge Richard Blackwood's reputation precedes him through the whispered conversations around the room. He's in one of his moods. A public defender warns her client. 3 maximum fines already this morning. At 68, Blackwood is known for running his courtroom with military precision, a holdover from his Marine Corps days. His silver hair and perpetual scowl have become legendary in the county's traffic court. Marcus observes the proceedings with professional interest, noting how Blackwood handles each case before his. The judge's patience seems inversely proportional to the defendant's melanin levels, a pattern that wouldn't be obvious to casual observers, but stands out starkly to a prosecutor trained to recognize subtle biases. Docket number 47,293, Thompson v. State, the clerk announces, her voice echoing through the now familiar acoustics of the aging courtroom. Marcus rises, straightening his tie as he approaches the podium. The movement causes several heads to turn. It's not often that traffic court sees a defendant in a $1,000 suit. He places his documents on the podium with practiced precision, the same way he's done countless times before federal judges. "Good morning, Your Honor," Marcus begins, his rich baritone carrying the quiet authority that's won him numerous high-profile cases. "I'm here regarding a citation for allegedly impeding traffic on Oak Hill Road last Tuesday morning. I've prepared a brief explanation along with photographic evidence of the school zone signage that—" "I have the officer's report right here, Mr. Thompson," Judge Blackwood interrupts, barely glancing up from his papers. His reading glasses sit low on his nose as he peers over them with obvious disdain. "Officer Sullivan is one of our most reliable officers. Says here you were creating a hazard by driving unnecessarily slow in a residential area." "Your Honor, if I may," Marcus continues, maintaining his professional composure, "I was observing the posted school zone speed limit. I've brought photographs showing the signage, and I have documentation of my son's enrollment at Oak Hill Elementary, which would explain my presence in the area." Judge Blackwood waves his hand dismissively. "We're not here to discuss your personal affairs, Mr. Thompson." The citation clearly states. "Your Honor," Marcus interjects carefully, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. The posted speed limit." "Are you interrupting me?" Blackwood's voice carries the sharp edge of authority challenged. The courtroom falls silent, and even the court reporter's fingers freeze above her stenotype. "I don't appreciate having my time wasted with elaborate excuses. The fine is $500, plus court costs." Next case. Marcus stands perfectly still, his hand resting on his documentation. 20 years of legal experience tells him this is a clear abuse of discretion, but he also knows traffic court judges are rarely overturned on appeal. The real issue isn't the money. It's the principle, the familiar sting of presumed guilt. "Your Honor," he tries one final time, his voice level but firm, "I would like to enter these documents into the record for—" "Make that $750, Blackwood snaps, his face flushing with anger. "Would you like to try for an even $1,000, Mr. Thompson?" At that precise moment, the heavy courtroom doors swing open. The sharp click of heels against marble floor draws everyone's attention as Janet Chen, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, strides purposefully into the courtroom. "Marcus, thank God you're still here," she calls out, her voice carrying the authority of her office. "We need to move up the Martinez grand jury. The FBI just brought in new evidence and—" "Oh," she stops short, taking in the scene before her. "I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Assistant U.S. Attorney Thompson, and I have an urgent federal matter that requires immediate attention." The silence that follows is deafening. Judge Blackwood's face transitions from crimson to ashen with remarkable speed. His reading glasses slip down his nose as he stares at Janet Chen, the U.S. Attorney's pristine Navy suit and federal credentials commanding the room's attention. The same courtroom that moments ago crackled with his authority now fills with uncomfortable murmurs and shifting glances. "Assistant U.S. Attorney," Blackwood repeats, the words sticking in his throat like dry toast. He shuffles through his papers, suddenly looking at Marcus's documentation with new interest. The judge's hands tremble slightly, a detail not lost on the attorneys present. Janet Chen, renowned for her diplomatic skills in federal prosecutions, reads the room perfectly. "Yes, Your Honor. Marcus Thompson is our lead prosecutor on the Martinez cartel case. Perhaps you've seen it in the news." Her tone is pleasant but pointed, each word carefully chosen. He's been instrumental in dismantling one of the largest drug trafficking operations on the East Coast. Marcus stands quietly, his dignified silence more powerful than any argument he could make. He watches as 2 decades of Judge Blackwood's assumptions crumble in real time. The other defendants in the courtroom lean forward, sensing the shift in power dynamics, witnesses to an unexpected moment of justice. I see," Blackwood manages, tugging at his collar. The temperature in the room seems to have risen 10 degrees. "Mr. Thompson, why didn't you mention your position earlier?" "Your Honor," Marcus responds, his voice carrying the same measured tone he'd maintained throughout. "I believe every citizen deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of their position. My profession shouldn't influence the handling of a traffic citation any more than my appearance should." A young law clerk in the back of the courtroom suppresses a smile, her phone discreetly capturing the exchange. The court reporter's fingers fly across her stenotype, preserving every word of this increasingly historic morning session. Janet steps closer to the bench, her heels echoing in the silence. "Judge Blackwood, while I hate to interrupt your proceedings, we do have that time-sensitive matter. The Attorney General himself is awaiting our call." She turns slightly, ensuring her words carry to the back of the courtroom. "Marcus, your argument before the grand jury last week was brilliant, securing those RICO indictments against 3 sitting city officials. The Department of Justice is lucky to have you." The judge's gavel sits untouched on its sound block, much like his authority in this moment. He removes his reading glasses, polishing them with his handkerchief, a nervous habit that only surfaces in moments of extreme discomfort. Of course," Blackwood stammers, trying to regain his composure, "given the circumstances, and reviewing these documents more thoroughly now." He pauses, looking at the same papers he dismissed minutes ago. "I'm going to dismiss this citation. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus gathers his documents with deliberate slowness, each movement a statement. "Thank you, Your Honor," he says, his voice carrying no hint of triumph or resentment. "However, I would like to note for the record that my position with the Department of Justice is irrelevant to the validity of this citation. The same consideration should be given to every citizen who appears before this court." The weight of his words settles over the courtroom like heavy snow. Several observers nod in agreement, while others study their shoes, processing their own witnessed biases. As Marcus turns to leave with Janet, Judge Blackwood calls out, his voice having lost its earlier authority. "Mr. Thompson, a moment, please." But Janet smoothly intervenes. "I apologize, Your Honor, but that federal grand jury won't wait. Perhaps another time." Her smile is professional, but her eyes carry a clear message about power dynamics and consequences. Walking out of courtroom 3, Marcus and Janet pass the remaining defendants, a diverse group watching them with newfound hope. The young law clerk who recorded the exchange is already typing furiously on her phone, her social media post about to light the first spark of what will become a judicial firestorm. "They had no idea who they were messing with," Janet mutters as they exit. Marcus adjusts his tie, his expression thoughtful. "That's exactly the problem. Janet. They shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them fairly. Behind them, through the closing doors, Judge Blackwood stares at his docket, suddenly aware that his morning of routine traffic violations has just become anything but routine. By Wednesday morning, the video of Marcus Thompson's traffic court appearance has amassed over 2 million views. The young law clerk's social media post, initially shared within legal circles, explodes across platforms with the hashtag #JudgeForYourself. Local news vans congregate outside the courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal sunflowers, searching for the next big story. Inside his chambers, Judge Richard Blackwood sits surrounded by newspapers. The headlines glare at him accusingly. Federal prosecutor faces judicial bias. Traffic stop to wake-up call. Justice system under scrutiny. And most damaging, pattern of prejudice. A deep dive into Judge Blackwood's record. His morning coffee grows cold, untouched, as he reads the meticulous analysis of his past rulings. Richard, the Judicial Review Board, is on line 1. His assistant Margaret announces, her voice carrying a note of concern she can't quite hide. After 30 years of working together, this is the first time she's seen him arrive at work wearing mismatched socks. Local data journalists have been working overtime, combing through public records of Blackwood's decisions. The numbers paint a damning picture. Minorities in his courtroom received fines averaging 60% higher than their white counterparts for identical offenses. The statistical analysis is brutal in its clarity. Graphs and charts circulating online show disparities too significant to be coincidental. "Cancel my afternoon docket," Blackwood mutters, loosening his bow tie. The same tie he's worn every Tuesday for the past 15 years suddenly feels like a noose. In the courthouse hallways, colleagues who once sought his mentorship now find urgent reasons to avoid eye contact. Judge Sarah Martinez, who regularly had lunch with him for a decade, suddenly remembers a backlog of cases requiring her immediate attention. The isolation is swift and complete. Meanwhile, across town at the federal courthouse, Marcus Thompson stands before a podium, addressing reporters after securing another conviction in the Martinez cartel case. Questions about his traffic court experience interrupt his usual post-trial press conference. "Mr. Thompson, will you be filing a formal complaint against Judge Blackwood?" Marcus adjusts his tie, choosing his words carefully. This isn't about one judge or one incident. This is about systemic issues that deserve thoughtful examination rather than knee-jerk reactions. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division has already announced a broader investigation into the county's judicial practices. What started as a routine traffic stop has sparked a referendum on judicial bias in the entire state. Back in his chambers, Blackwood discovers his own daughter, a civil rights attorney in Seattle, has shared the viral video. Her comment cuts deeper than any news headline. "Dad, we need to talk. This isn't who you raised me to be." His computer screen fills with emails from past defendants, their stories pouring in like a breaking dam. A mother who lost her housing after excessive fines for a minor violation. A college student forced to drop out after being unable to pay compounded penalties. Each story adds another crack to the foundation of his certainty. The courthouse security guard, James Wilson, brings Blackwood his usual afternoon tea, a ritual unchanged for years. Today, though, Wilson doesn't just set down the cup and leave. "Judge," Wilson says, his voice quiet but firm, "my son appeared before you last year. Speeding ticket. $300 fine. Turned into $900 after you said he showed insufficient respect for the court." He was saying "sir" after every sentence. Blackwood looks up, really seeing Wilson for the first time in 15 years. The guard's gray-streaked hair and dignified bearing remind him of his own father. He works 3 jobs to pay those fines, Wilson continues. Still does. And you never once looked him in the eye, just like you never really looked at me until today. As Wilson turns to leave, Blackwood calls out, "James, wait." But the door closes with a soft click, leaving the judge alone with the weight of thousands of small injustices, each one now demanding to be acknowledged. Outside his window, more news vans arrive. His phone buzzes with another call from the Judicial Review Board. On his desk, a framed photo of himself taking the judicial oath catches the afternoon light. To uphold justice equally, without fear or favor. The storm has broken, and there's nowhere left to hide. The grandfather clock in Judge Blackwood's study strikes midnight, its deep chimes echoing through the empty house. He hasn't moved from his leather chair in hours, surrounded by towers of case files that span his 20-year career. His bow tie hangs loose around his neck, and the crystal tumbler of bourbon beside him remains untouched, a first in his nightly routine. Each file represents a life he's impacted, decisions made in moments but carrying consequences that ripple through years. Under the warm light of his desk lamp, patterns he never acknowledged emerge like shadows at sunset, growing longer and darker with each case he reviews. Defendant shows contempt for court procedures he'd written in one file. Now, reading his own words, he sees a young man who was simply nervous, repeatedly saying, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," with a slight stutter. The fine he'd imposed had been triple the standard amount. His wife Sarah finds him at dawn, paper scattered across his mahogany desk. She's never seen him like this, his silver hair disheveled, reading glasses perched crookedly on his nose, legal pads filled with calculations and notes in his usually pristine handwriting. "Richard," she says softly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you haven't slept." He looks up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "Do you remember Jason Wilson? James Wilson's son. The security guard's boy. The one you fined last year." Blackwood pulls out a file, his hands trembling slightly. 3 moving violations in my court. White defendants with identical charges, similar circumstances. Average fine $150. I charged him $900. Made him miss a semester of community college. He pushes his glasses up, rubbing his eyes. I told myself it was about respect for the law. But looking at these numbers. Sarah sits across from him, her morning robe wrapped tight against the pre-dawn chill. "What made you start reviewing these cases?" "Marcus Thompson," he replies, gesturing to a newspaper clipping about the federal prosecutor. "When I saw him in my courtroom, I made the same assumptions I've been making for 20 years. But this time, I got caught. This time, I had to see it." He stands, walking to the window where the first hints of sunrise paint the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. The same sun that's risen on thousands of his court sessions, witnessing judgments he can never take back. "I've been telling myself I'm tough but fair," he continues, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I treat everyone the same. But the numbers don't lie, Sarah. The patterns are there in black and white. Literally." Sarah watches her husband of 40 years, seeing him wrestle with truths that have always lived in their blind spots. "What are you going to do?" He turns back to his desk, picking up a legal pad filled with neat columns of data. "I've reviewed 237 cases so far. In 179 of them, I imposed higher fines on minorities for the same offenses. That's not justice, Sarah. That's not what I swore an oath to uphold." The morning light strengthens, illuminating the wall of legal texts behind him, books that taught him the letter of the law, but perhaps missed its spirit. His fingers trace the spines of volumes he's referenced thousands of times, wondering how he missed such fundamental lessons in justice. "I could retire," he says, voicing the thought that's been hovering since the incident. Quiet resignation. Let it all blow over. Sarah stands, straightening his bow tie with the same care she's shown for 4 decades. "Is that what you want your legacy to be?" The question hangs in the air as the neighborhood begins to wake. Through his study window, he watches a young black father helping his daughter onto a school bus. The scene triggers a memory of Marcus Thompson mentioning his own child at Oak Hill Elementary. Blackwood turns back to his desk, pulls out a fresh legal pad, and begins to write. The heading at the top reads, "Proposal for Judicial Reform and Bias Recognition Program." "No," he finally answers his wife. "That's not my legacy. This is just the beginning." The grandfather clock strikes 6, marking the start of a new day. In his study, surrounded by evidence of his past failures, Judge Richard Blackwood begins the work of redemption, one case file at a time. The marble halls of the State Judicial Center buzz with anticipation. Today's Emergency Review Board hearing wasn't supposed to be public, but word spread quickly when Judge Richard Blackwood declined his attorney's representation. Now, at 9 a.m. sharp, the 15 members of the board shuffle their papers nervously, their black robes a stark contrast against the mahogany panels behind them. Judge Richard Blackwood. Chief Justice Eleanor Martinez announces, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the Supreme Court bench. You stand before this board to address serious allegations of judicial misconduct. Do you understand the gravity of these charges? Blackwood stands alone at the podium, his bow tie perfectly straight, a thick binder open before him. The audience section is packed. Lawyers, activists, and most notably, several defendants from his past cases. In the front row, Marcus Thompson sits observing, his presence adding another layer of tension to the proceedings. I do, Your Honor, Blackwood responds, his voice steady despite the circumstances. However, I'm not here to defend my past actions. I'm here to propose a solution. A murmur ripples through the crowd. This isn't the defensive stance they expected from a judge known for his unwavering certainty. Instead of offering resignations or excuses, he continues, I'm presenting a comprehensive program for judicial reform. He begins distributing bound proposals to each board member. I spent the past week analyzing 20 years of my own rulings, documenting patterns of bias I can no longer deny. The Chief Justice leans forward, adjusting her reading glasses. You're admitting to biased rulings, Judge Blackwood. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence is irrefutable. He gestures to the proposal. Page 37 contains a statistical analysis of fine disparities in my court, broken down by race, gender, and economic status. Page 52 outlines specific cases where my prejudices affected sentencing. The room falls silent as the board members flip through the documents. Even the usual shuffle of papers seems muted by the weight of this moment. What exactly are you proposing? Justice Martinez asks, her tone softening with curiosity. Blackwood straightens, his silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the high windows. I'm volunteering to become a case study in judicial bias recognition, working with civil rights attorneys, including Mr. Thompson if he's willing. I want to establish a mandatory training program for all judges in our state. He clicks a button, and the presentation screen behind him illuminates with graphs and charts. The program includes quarterly bias audits, mandatory diversity training, and a new appeals process for cases where bias may have influenced sentencing. From the front row, Marcus Thompson watches with professional interest as Blackwood outlines a program that could revolutionize the state's judicial system. The same social media channels that nearly destroyed the judge's career now light up with real-time updates from the hearing. Furthermore, Blackwood continues, his voice growing stronger. I'm requesting permission to establish a review board for past cases where bias may have affected outcomes. Not just my cases, any judge willing to participate in this program. A younger board member leans forward. You realize this could open floodgates of appeals. Yes, Blackwood responds without hesitation, and every one of those appeals represents an opportunity to restore faith in our justice system. He turns to face the audience, making eye contact with faces he might have overlooked weeks ago. I've spent my career viewing justice through a lens distorted by prejudices I didn't want to acknowledge. It took public humiliation and personal crisis to make me see it. But now that I do, I have a choice. Retire in disgrace, or use this moment to create real change. Chief Justice Martinez removes her glasses, studying the man before her. And you're willing to be the face of this initiative, to admit your mistakes publicly. With respect, Your Honor, I already am the face of judicial bias. The question is whether I'll also become the face of judicial reform. In the back of the room, the young law clerk whose video started it all posts one final update. Sometimes justice wears a bow tie and admits it was wrong. #ChangePossible, #JusticeForAll. The board calls for a brief recess to review the proposal, but in the hallway conversations that follow, one thing becomes clear. Judge Blackwood's greatest contribution to justice might not be any verdict he's handed down, but rather his willingness to question every one of them. The Riverside Cafe sits halfway between the federal and county courthouses, a neutral ground where judges and lawyers often broker unofficial deals over cups of artisanal coffee. Today, at 3 p.m., the usual buzz of legal chatter dims as Marcus Thompson walks in, briefcase in hand. Judge Richard Blackwood already occupies a corner table, his bow tie slightly askew, 2 untouched cups of coffee growing cold before him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Mr. Thompson," Blackwood says, rising as Marcus approaches. The formality in his voice can't hide the nervous energy in his movements. Or should I say Assistant U.S. Attorney Thompson? "Marcus is fine," Thompson replies, settling into the chair opposite Blackwood. "Though 2 weeks ago in your courtroom, it seemed my title mattered quite a bit." A barista approaches with fresh coffee, but both men wave her away. The autumn sun streams through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across their table, much like the shadow Blackwood's past decisions have cast across countless lives. "I spent the past 2 weeks reviewing cases," Blackwood begins, opening a worn leather portfolio. "But I'm not here to show you statistics or proposals. I'm here to understand." Marcus leans back, studying the man before him. Gone is the imperious judge who nearly fined him $1,000. In his place sits someone older, more vulnerable, yet somehow more dignified in his humility. "What exactly do you want to understand, Judge Blackwood?" "Everything I've been blind to. My first year of law school, I was taught that justice is blind. But I'm starting to think maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it needs to see clearly, to recognize its own biases." Marcus takes a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Do you know how many times I've been pulled over in Oak Hill?" "Your file mentioned 3 times in 2 months. 17 times in 5 years, Marcus corrects him. "I keep a log. Date, time, officer's name, reason given. Most don't end in citations, just routine checks that somehow only feel routine for certain drivers." Blackwood winces, but forces himself to maintain eye contact. "Tell me more." For the next hour, Marcus shares stories that never made it into court records. The time he was mistaken for a defendant while wearing his DOJ badge. The school security guard who followed his son during a science fair. The colleague who expressed surprise at his Harvard law degree, wondering aloud about admission policies. "But here's what you need to understand," Marcus continues, his voice level but intense. "These aren't just anecdotes for a sensitivity training session. Each incident chips away at faith in the system. When I stand before a jury arguing for justice, I need to believe in that justice myself." Blackwood nods slowly, his coffee now completely cold. "I've been asking myself how many Marcus Thompsons sat before me over the years, not federal prosecutors, but people who deserve the same respect, the same presumption of competence and innocence. And what answer did you find?" "Too many." Blackwood's voice cracks slightly. "Far too many." A group of law clerks enters the cafe, their excited chatter about a recent Supreme Court decision creating a momentary backdrop. Both men wait for the noise to settle before continuing. "Your reform proposal," Marcus says, pulling out his own copy. "It's comprehensive. But what makes you think you're the right person to lead this change?" "I'm not," Blackwood responds immediately. "I'm the example of what needs to change. But I'm hoping you'll help me design something better. Your perspective, your experience, they're crucial to making this work." Marcus studies the judge's face, seeing genuine pain and determination in the lines around his eyes. "You understand this won't be comfortable, that you'll hear things that challenge everything you've believed about your career." "I stopped being comfortable 2 weeks ago," Blackwood replies with a wan smile. "Comfort isn't what I'm seeking anymore." As the afternoon light fades, 2 men who began as adversaries find common ground in the pursuit of something larger than themselves. Their coffee remains untouched, that something else is brewing in this quiet corner of the Riverside Cafe. The beginning of real change. 1 year later, the State Judicial Center's main auditorium buzzes with anticipation. The space, usually reserved for bar admission ceremonies, today hosts the launch of the Judicial Fairness Initiative. Every seat is filled. Judges, lawyers, civil rights activists, and most notably, dozens of individuals whose cases sparked this transformation. Judge Richard Blackwood, still wearing his signature bow tie but somehow standing taller than a year ago, approaches the podium. Beside him, Marcus Thompson adjusts the microphone, their easy cooperation a testament to months of bridge building. 1 year ago, Blackwood begins, his voice carrying to the rafters. I sat in my chambers convinced that I was administering blind justice. Today, I stand before you because I learned that justice shouldn't be blind. It should be clear-sighted, conscious, and constantly self-examining. The presentation screen behind him displays striking statistics. Over 1,000 cases reviewed, 347 sentences adjusted, and 89 judges across the state voluntarily enrolled in the bias recognition program. But it's the smaller number that draws attention. 42, the number of judges who, like Blackwood, came forward to audit their own past decisions. The Judicial Fairness Initiative isn't just about recognizing our mistakes. Marcus steps forward, seamlessly taking over. It's about creating systematic change. He gestures to a group of young lawyers in the front row, the program's first class of bias review specialists, trained to spot patterns that individual judges might miss. Among them sits the law clerk whose viral video sparked the initial firestorm. Now she's a full-time member of the initiative's review board, her social media savvy transformed into a tool for tracking the program's impact across different communities. We've instituted quarterly bias audits, Blackwood continues, clicking to the next slide. Every judge in the program submits their decisions for statistical analysis. Pattern recognition software, developed in partnership with the State University's AI Ethics Department, helps identify potential disparities before they become systemic problems. The screen shifts to show a heat map of the state, highlighting areas where the program has already made an impact. In Oak Hill, traffic stop disparities have dropped by 47%. The county courthouse, once known for its harsh fines against minority defendants, now boasts the state's most progressive fee adjustment program. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Marcus adds, nodding to a man in the audience. James Wilson, the courthouse security guard, stands briefly, his son beside him. Thanks to our retroactive review process, we've adjusted hundreds of excessive fines. Jason Wilson here just completed his first semester at State College, his fines reduced to reflect true judicial fairness. Blackwood steps forward again, removing his reading glasses. Some of you may remember me as the judge who fined a federal prosecutor out of Prejudice. Others know me from years of appearing in my courtroom. But today, I hope you'll know me as someone who learned that it's never too late to acknowledge our biases and work to overcome them. The presentation continues with announcements of new initiatives. Mandatory diversity training for all court personnel, community feedback sessions, and a groundbreaking mentorship program pairing veteran judges with lawyers from underrepresented communities. As the ceremony concludes, Marcus and Blackwood stand together at the podium, physically embodying the bridge between past and future. The applause that follows isn't just polite. It's thunderous, filled with hope and possibility. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, Blackwood adds a final document to his wall. Not another law degree or certification, but a simple framed tweet from a year ago. #JudgeForYourself has become #JudgeForAll. Beside it hangs a new photo, himself and Marcus Thompson, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by case files during one of their many late-night review sessions. Ready for tomorrow's training session, Marcus asks from the doorway, briefcase in hand. Blackwood straightens his bow tie, a habit now imbued with new meaning. Ready to keep learning, he responds, gathering his materials for their next presentation to incoming judges. Outside his window, the sun sets on another day in the justice system, a system that, thanks to one traffic stop and two men willing to turn conflict into collaboration, is slowly but surely becoming more just for all.